Hello, comic geeks out there. This is Systematic Geekology, and we are here with another episode of Comic Book Ketchup, where we talk about all the comics we've been reading and geeking out on. I am Kevin Schaefer, and here with me is our resident professor at Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, who's also in the Christmas spirit. So, Andy Walsh, how are you today?
I am doing very well, thanks, Kevin. How are you?
Doing great. Andy, if you were a professor at Xavier School, like what subject would you teach, do you think?
Oh, that's a great question. I've been doing a lot of computer programming lately. My job kind of goes back and forth. So some days it's programming heavy, some days it's not. But I've been doing a lot more lately, so probably that's what's on my mind. Some kind of computer science class. But so probably programming the danger room, right? Like to
Yes, that would be awesome.
make it a little bit more genre specific.
Does it help students design simulations there? That would be great.
Yeah, that seems like it'd be fun. How about
I
you?
was thinking that. Man, I don't know. I just think of that line in X2 when they go to Bobby Drake's house and the parents are like, "What exactly are you, Professor of, Mister Logan?" He's like, "Art." Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe I would be. I mean, I don't know. I was an English major and always been like a theater nerd, so I would do something in that realm. But yeah,
Excellent. Improv
yeah,
for
exactly. Improv
combat
for
skills.
mutants. I'm sure that would have a place there. That would be awesome. But yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Andy, before we get to our main books, what are some either other comics you're geeking out on or media in general?
Yeah, good question. Let's see, comic book adjacent. I've been going back and watching some of the Marvel Netflix shows in preparation for Daredevil Born Again beginning of next year. That's been a nice reminder of what they were up to, and some of them I hadn't actually finished all the seasons of, so it's nice to go back and catch up on those again. Um, what about you?
Though, yeah, I was gonna say those are some of my favorites. I was just telling Andy before this call, I got to meet Charlie Cox, John Bernthal, and Deborah and Wool at cons this year, and they were all fantastic. But I have been rewatching some of those too, particularly Daredevil and Punisher. But I'm going to go through the other ones as well because I mean they've been saying that like it's a loose continuity there in terms of like where Born Again will pick up, but I think still a lot of the storylines and the arcs will be very pertinent to what's going on in Born Again. So yeah, I'm very excited for that. But otherwise, I talked about Skeleton Crew and Creature Commandos the other day on our Tolkien animated episode. So I watched the latest Skeleton Crew today. Really enjoyed it. And then other comics, I've been going through Irredeemable by Mark Waid and Peter Krause, which was like 2009 through 2012 superhero series published by Boom Studios. Excellent series. I have the omnibus like digitally through a Humble Bundle. And I was just picking out, I mean, Mark Waid's always been one of my favorite writers, but and I got to meet him at GalaxyCon last year. But I'd never gone through this series, and I really love it. It is one of the like darker superhero stories, but still much a love letter. It's basically about the world's greatest superhero who goes mad and goes on a killing rampage, and the rest of his team have to figure out a way to stop him. And it has very complex, layered characters. There's echoes of Watchmen and other titles like that, Jupiter's Legacy in there, but yeah, it's incredibly entertaining, amazing art, very fluid storytelling. So I've got about probably a little less than a third left, I would say, going through the omnibus, but that has been an excellent read. So really enjoying that.
Great. Thinking about comics reminded me. I did want to bring up again. I talked about it a little bit the last time I was on Comic Book Catch Up, but we got kind of abbreviated. But the new graphic novel by Kieran Gillen and Stephanie Hans, I'm pretty sure is on the art. We called them Giants. Um,
Yeah.
it's a self-contained sci-fi story, original story, and I wasn't sure what it was about. Like I didn't really know anything about it going in, other than I know I like Kieran Gillen,
Yeah.
and uh, it turned out to be kind of a sci-fi alien first encounter kind of story. hit a lot of the same buttons for me as Arrival, in that dealing with that theme of like how do you actually communicate with aliens when they are alien? That like there's nothing that you share in common. And we called them giants because they're not even the same scale. They're not even operating on the same like dimensions, right? That these aliens are just so much bigger than the humans, and so yeah, I was really into it. It took a little while before, it's not that long of a story, but it still took me about a third of the way into the book before I went, oh, I see where we're going here, and then I was really into it. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that one again.
That sounds fascinating. I mean, I love Arrival. And also, I think when you were talking about that, it might have been Josh who said that title sounds familiar. There's another classic graphic novel called I Kill Giants, which was
Yes.
a very different story, but that one is also excellent and was made into a movie too. But this one sounds great. I definitely want to pick that up.
Yeah, and while we're in the Wayback Machine, I also had a chance to see the 10th anniversary of Interstellar. It did IMAX
Ooh,
re-release. I don't think
ooh,
I got to see it in IMAX the first time around, so that was a nice
yeah.
opportunity to see it in that format, and just also a good excuse to revisit an excellent film. I don't know how long that's in theaters. Maybe it's already come and gone, but if you have a chance, I would recommend that.
I also have never seen it in IMAX. I remember seeing it in theaters when it came out, and I've rewatched it multiple times. But that is one of Nolan's best. An amazing film.
Yeah, and it was just fun to sit there and physically feel like the rocket's taking off and the low notes and the organ and the score at times. So yeah, that
Oh,
was a
I
pretty
can
cool
imagine.
experience.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, excellent pick.
So
Excellent. Well, that was some great things we're geeking out on. And to start off, for our first book, let's see what it is. Okay, so Absolute Superman, number one. This was Andy, you and Joshua touched on this a little bit on the
very
last comic book
briefly.
catch up. Yeah. But I got to read this one. My books are going to be focusing on DC's Absolute Universe. And so this one I quite enjoyed. As a little teaser, the one I'll be talking about after this, I loved, but this one I did really enjoy. So yeah, I think you guys kind of touched a little bit on the plot of this is so. At first, if you don't really know what the DC Absolute Universe is, these are kind of like I wouldn't even call them Elseworlds tales completely because it's an interconnected universe. It's just like imagine it's like all Elseworld tales, and this is like the new kind of version. So these are revamped origin stories for all the big characters, and they all inhabit this particular universe. And so with Absolute Superman, some of the big changes include the Jor-El and Laura-El are not at the top of the ladder in Krypton. They are at the bottom as these like mine workers. And Jor-El still is one to suspect that Krypton's surface is deteriorating and there's major troubles there. But the Krypton is divided into a very like social class system, and his family's at the bottom, and so he has no influence over the ruling science class. So his theories are kind of amok. And then and also him and Laura-El are still alive in this universe. They flee to Earth with Kal-El. And when I thought it was really interesting too, it's Kal-El like comes to Earth like as a kid, not as a baby. So I think that will be a really interesting dynamic. And as far as when we open with Kal-El Clark's story, he's in Brazil, which is also focusing on miners who are being oppressed by an army of peacemaker robots, like the peacemaker, the character. They're all like robots, like designed like that character, and they're working for this big corporation, the Lazarus Corp. And we learn at the end of the issue that Brainiac is in charge of the Lazarus Corp, and also Lois Lane is an employee there, and she has a gun to Superman's head, or well, to Clark's head at the end of the issue. So a lot to unpack there. I will say, like, I think I remember you guys saying like it was pretty good, not like amazing. I would agree with that. But I think it was a really strong first issue. I think for this series, I'm more interested in waiting for the trade because I really want to get the full arc here because there was a lot here. I think Jason Aaron's writing was really strong here. I loved Rafa Sandoval's art was phenomenal. But I kind of like with this issue, not that it didn't feel like it felt like incomplete or anything, but I felt like I really wanted the full first arc to get more of an impression of this book in particular. So I might trade weight for this one. But I still thought it was a solid first entry. As far as characterization, it's just like anytime there's kind of a darker Superman, or at least like a different origin kind of here, I do miss like those quintessential elements of who Clark Kent is, but obviously this is what the Absolute Universe is trying to do. It is like this very alternate take on things. But I think my favorite parts of it were looking at the kind of outline of Krypton in this universe, looking at the class system there, seeing that Jor-El and Lor-El are not at the top, but that they're toward the bottom of the social class, and how that will influence who Superman becomes. We don't get much insight into his upbringing with the Kents here. They are teased in this issue, but we don't learn too much there. Again, most of Clark is in Brazil in this issue with the miners. So there's a lot of interesting elements. I'm excited to see where this will go forward. But what are some of your other I know you touched on it in the last episode, but do you have any other thoughts on any of those elements or just the story in general?
Yeah, so I think part of maybe how I react to it is I think I have high expectations for Jason Aaron too, and
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
some of it, and this kind of carries over into the second issue, which I had a chance to look through, is that it doesn't feel like it's maybe his strongest writing. I felt like especially issue two relied a lot on narration rather
Yeah.
than so we're being told a lot about what's going on or about who Superman is rather than actually seeing that on the page in the art. And some of the stuff with the Brainiac AI is a little bit like there's just been so much about AI in the past year or so that it's hard to have an interesting take, I think. So that was maybe a little bit where I think I just maybe had very high expectations. But I don't think it's doing anything bad. I don't think it's a wrong take on Superman, or that this isn't how Superman should be or anything like that. I think it's taking a little bit to get into, and I think that's also partly by design, because we're we're not really with Superman as like a point of view character or anything like that. It's very much we're getting the other characters' impressions and thoughts about Superman, and he's brand new, at least in terms of his activity on the world stage as a superhero, and so they're only partially formed initial impressions and so forth. So we're not really getting much insight into Kal-El or Clark himself and how he looks at the world, and so I think that's maybe why it's a little bit harder to engage with. So it's not that I think that the book is doing anything bad. The art is certainly impressive to look at. I think it's dynamic when it needs to be. Like you say, there are lots of interesting ideas on taking a different angle on the Superman origin and the Superman mythos. I think it just I think you might have the right strategy. That I think it might be a book that will work better in a collected format than in these single issues. 'Cause I
Yeah,
think it'll.
I no, I think that's a good point. It's just like the lens there is maybe not what you expected or different. And I mean, Jason Aaron's one of my favorite writers, so you do kind of call it's hard not to have high expectations going in. I mean, some of my favorite books by him include like Southern Bastards and his Wolverine run, Thor, so many a lot of the Star Wars stuff. So I mean, he's done so many iconic titles over the years. So yeah, you did. I mean, that's fair to have a lot of expectation going in. But yeah, it's just like there are definitely some interesting elements here. It's still, I mean, a solid first issue, but yeah, I do think like when I finished it, I was like, and I haven't got a chance to get to the second issue yet. Yeah, I just think it would work better as if I can read the first like 5 or 6 issues and get the first arc, and then kind of give it a more accurate, overview and see how I feel about it then. But it is an intriguing start. Far from like, my favorite start to a Superman story, but a lot of interesting elements. I think the Lois. I mean, it's always I always like a good take on Lois and Clark, and especially something like this where they're going to be initially enemies, and maybe they'll be like that for a while. I want to know why she's working for the Lazarus Corp, and how all of the mechanisms there. So there's a lot to dissect, but that's a fair criticism too. Is like I also don't like when it's too bogged down in narration. I want to get more through dialogue and action, and see how the characters are feeling and interacting with each other. So yeah, that's definitely something I would want more of here going forward.
Yeah, well, I will say as a teaser that you'll definitely get more about Lois Lane in issue 2.
Yeah, and that
Um,
I'm excited for. Yeah, it was a great
yeah,
tease there at the end of the
yeah,
first issue.
yes, that was definitely an excellent cliffhanger.
Yeah,
I also
yeah.
see Christian in the comments has it seems like he shares your opinion, and I'll go ahead and say my opinion as well that the Absolute Batman is the top of
Oh
the
yes.
books from the Absolute line so far. Um,
It's pretty stellar, just as a tease. I will get more into that in a little bit.
yeah,
But Absolute Superman. I mean, I mean, I think if you're a Superman fan, this is definitely a really interesting take on the mythos, like you said, and the art is stellar. I just love that cover right there. And it's very different from what we've seen before. But yeah, I'm interested to see where these characters go. So I imagine I will pick up the trade when it comes out, and then maybe a future episode talk about that once I've read the full first arc.
cool.
But yeah, sweet. Well, Andy, what is your first book here?
Yep. So I wanted to talk about the first trade of Moon Man. So I talked about the first issue a while back, but I wanted to kind of circle back and look at this first trade, kind of like we were just talking about Superman, but we're in the future here where the trade is already available. Um, so this book is co-written by Kyle Higgins, who is a longtime comic writer, and uh, credited as Scott Mescudi, I believe, but known or Mescudi, known as Kid Cudi, as a musical performer. So I think he's kind of the driving force behind the ideas, and Kyle Higgins is chipping in on the how do you actually write a comic and all that kind of stuff. So this is a story about a space program, not unlike SpaceX or oh, now I'm blanking out. The company in this book is a little bit more of the Amazon style. Uh, a little bit of everything and lots of retail and so forth. And they also have a space program. And like first panel, page 1 of issue 1, you're meeting the astronauts are sitting in quarantine. They've come back from a failed moon mission, the first moon mission by this private company space program, and they had to abort because something went wrong, and they have like a missing 7 minutes. And after that, they aborted the mission, came back. They've been in quarantine on Earth for several weeks as we meet them in that first issue, and they're just kind of being the doctors and scientists and everybody are saying, all right, it's okay for you to go home. So over the course of the first issue, we follow one of the astronauts as he goes back home to be with his family in the Cleveland area, and kind of reintegrate into that neighborhood, into his family, and kind of seeing a different perspective on this company. So there's a lot of protests against this company, a lot of concerns about how they treat their employees, how they source different things, whether the space program is a good thing and having it be run privately, all the kind of concerns that are very much ripped from the headlines. And his younger brother is heavily involved in these protests, and kind of angry at his older brother for being for working for the man, kind of thing. And eventually we realize so his brother goes to a protest, and there's some violence there's some trouble that erupts there, and the main character shows up, and we discover that he has some superpowers. He seems to have the ability to manipulate gravity. And so he uses that, and he puts on his kind of spacesuit and uses those gravity powers to help his brother, but kind of causes trouble because he can't control his powers. And so it's very much a setup for like a Spider-Man year one kind of thing of unexpected powers, figuring out how to control them, what to do with them. Do they come with any sort of responsibility, say, and how do you live out that responsibility? And so that was kind of the first issue, was just setting up that world and setting up that premise and kind of teasing it, the powers that this guy has. And so he develops this identity as Moon Man. That's kind of how he gets dubbed in the press. It's the same kind of thing with Spider-Man and Superman, where nobody knows who he is, what's going on. There's just this mystery man who keeps showing up and doing things that normal people can't do. We discover that other people who were on that mission also came back and also have powers, and they have different thoughts about what to do with them. And obviously, the company, the Amazon-like company, has some thoughts about what these people should be doing with their powers, and so forth. And so it's in some way, if you just kind of describe the plot and describe the characters, it has very much like a this is how superhero comics work kind of thing. It's very much a origin story. But I think the art has a very interesting style. It's very very sketchy, very dynamic at times, and just kind of swirly, colory, like abstract at times, especially when they're using their gravity powers. And so I think that gives it a unique feel. It's obviously got a lot of thoughts about current societal issues, and so that makes it feel a little bit more relevant than just sort of generic superhero story. It's an interesting character. It's an interesting perspective. He's not a teenager. He's an older guy. He's got an established career, and so that comes with he has other responsibilities. He does he already kind of had maybe not great responsibility, but a certain amount of responsibility for his family, to his job, all those kinds of things. How does he balance that with these new thoughts that he's having and new powers that he has? So I think all that gives it kind of an interesting dimension that takes it beyond or elevates beyond just sort of generic superhero 101. And it's all it's solidly told, solidly executed, and so yeah, that makes it worthwhile too. I don't know if you've had any chance to interact with any of these books.
I've not this one, but it sounds interesting. And Kyle Higgins. I like a lot. Yeah, his Power Ranger stuff. Radiant Black is one of my favorite titles. I met him at GalaxyCon. Was it last year? I think, and I talked with him about like when he pitched Radiant Black, because it was a lot of creators like that are trying to pitch a superhero book to an indie publisher often have struggles with that. But I thought that is a great book. I like the cover here because it's very reminiscent of kind of like classic sci-fi pulpy magazines and movies. So you can see a lot of the influence there. And then with Kid Cudi, it's like, there are other musician superstars like Daryl from Run DMC, Gerard Way, who have, come into comics. And, and it's cool to see that intersection. Honestly, it makes a lot of sense because I think there's like a lot of crossover there just in terms of rhythm. And like, I think there's a quote about how writing a comic is like writing a rock song in many ways, because you have to have a specific rhythm and execution and just delivery there to make it happen. So it makes sense, but this sounds very much right up my alley. So I've not come across it yet, but I definitely will check it out. So excellent recommendation.
Yeah, and so just to shout out again, Marco Locati and Igor Monti on the pencils and colors. While Kid Cudi's name is above the title there and is kind of, I think, the driving force. Yeah. It is still very much an art showcase too. So I don't want to take away from that aspect either.
Sure.
And it's an ongoing book. So I think they're up to issue 7 or 8 or something. So if you like it, that there will continue to be more. The first trade is still very much just kind of a origin story, setting up the dynamic for what looks like to be a longer form story.
What publisher is it? Do you know?
That's a good question. I don't remember. I think it might be through Image, but I'm not positive about that.
Nice. Yeah. Oh, I will definitely check it out. That sounds great. So Moon Man. Cool. Very cool.
Shall I move on to Batman?
Let's do it. Let's
Give
do
people
it.
what they want.
Right. Let's do it. Okay, so Absolute Batman. I'll go ahead and talk about like kind of the first two issues here. But Andy, have you got a chance to read this one yet?
Yeah, since you said we were going to
Yeah,
talk about it, and I was interested anyway, I did go
yeah,
ahead
yeah.
and pick up the first two or look through the first two.
Yeah. So I will spoil bring in some things about the first issue, but yeah, so again, going back to the Absolute Universe. So first off, the big characteristics that separate this Batman from the one we know. First off, Bruce Wayne is not the rich, philanthropist of Gotham. He is a blue collar worker at the at the bottom there. He is not rich. He has no wealth, resources. And then while Thomas Wayne was killed when he was a kid, not in the classic crime alley manner, but it takes the murder there takes place at a zoo where Joe Chill is a mass shooter, which is sadly very relevant in today's world. And whereas in the classic Batman, his parents being killed in a depression era by someone who is impoverished and desperate. That was very indicative of that time. This now brings to the modern context, and so so he's murdered the zoo, but Martha Wayne survives, and that is, I think, one of the biggest elements that makes this story so fascinating, and how that will shape Bruce going forward. And also Bruce, as you can see just from that cover, he is ripped as can be. It's like, I think I heard a description earlier that he was like, imagine two Batflecks together. That's very accurate because I think without all the wealth and resources that we're accustomed to Bruce Wayne Batman having, he has to develop everything on his own. So he trains relentlessly. He has to rely on brute strength and force in addition to his intellectual abilities. And so that's some of the defining aspects of Bruce. Another thing is that a lot of the members of Batman's Rogue Gallery are presented here as friends of Bruce Wayne. They grew up together, so he grows up with the alias of Killer Croc and Two-Face and Penguin. All of these are presented as allies of Riddler, and they play poker together, and so they all grew up together on the streets, and that's one of the things I'm really fascinated to see how that will play out. And then, as you can see in this cover, that is Alfred right there as a secret agent who is coming to Gotham and ends up on a task force to take Batman down. So that right there, this was fascinating too, because for a long time, readers of Batman, that that Alfred has a background in the military, and like in the Earth One universe in particular, they really delved into that. And even in the Batman movie, the Matt Reeves one, they allude to that as well with Andy Serkis as Alfred. So that's not unheard of, but this version is like more like Punisher-esque. I mean, he is really brutal. Like even he's narrating in the opening issue and saying things like, "I've come back to Gotham to do bad things," kind of like as they, So I am fascinated by this dynamic and how this will play out. So that is another element that makes this, version of Batman and this story so unique. And also, one of the biggest things teased at the end of issue 1 is that the Joker, on the flip side, is one of the richest people on Earth, and like that is such a fascinating dynamic to do the inverse there and have Bruce at the bottom of the economic totem pole, and then Joker at the top, and I cannot wait to see how that plays out. Otherwise, you've got Black Mask as sort of the big villain here, running gangs, and there's a big gang causing chaos here. But yeah, and just seeing Batman, unleash in that first issue again as this hulking, towering figure with an axe too was fascinating. But yeah, I just think this. I mean, you're talking about Jason Aaron, how you have such high expectations for a writer like that. Same thing, especially with Scott Snyder doing another Batman story. You're going to come in with high expectations, just because, he's been writing the character for so long, and I think I love how Snyder has said multiple times that, this is my last Batman story. Even even like he did after he finished his main run in New 52 and did All Star Batman, he did a book called Batman Last Night on Earth, which he said that was going to be his sayonara, and then here we are. But that does not disappoint me at all because he was absolutely the right writer to take on this story. I think he absolutely nailed it, and these first two issues have been stellar. Nick Dragotta's art is phenomenal, right up there with Snyder and Capullo's collaboration. This too is equally dynamic, and I cannot wait to see it continue. Yeah, and of course the colors by Frank Martin and lettering by Clayton Cowles, longtime collaborators of Snyder. So I've absolutely loved these first couple of issues. Andy, are you as like in love with it as me, or are you like, what are your kind of thoughts? No worries if you're not, because I don't want to influence your opinion. But
No, I thought these were really fun books. I think thinking back about this Absolute Superman and how it felt like we weren't really engaged with Clark. I think Batman, for whatever reason, and I don't have a good explanation necessarily, but for whatever reason, Batman stories work okay if Batman is not the main character, right? I mean, you think of things like the Gotham PD book,
yeah, Gotham
where
Central, yeah,
Gotham Central, yeah, where
yeah, mm-hmm.
where Batman hardly appears in a number of issues, right? He's just sort of this force in the background. Um, there are times in the movies where he's played that way, for scenes or for stretches of the film, and so yeah, it just that works as a Batman story in a way that I don't know that it works for Superman, and so these books get away with that. I mean, we also don't get a whole lot of first person. What is Bruce Wayne thinking? What is Bruce Wayne like? What is Batman like? We get a lot of narration from Alfred, but for whatever reason, you can do that in a Batman comic and it works really well. And maybe it just also Scott Snyder's executing a little bit better, or Scott Snyder has had more time to think about Batman and what makes for a good Batman story. That may be part of it. But yeah, just you're seeing Batman be an absolute force, and always one. It really plays up that like he's always one step ahead, even though he doesn't have the same monetary resources. He can still plan. He can still train. He can still do all these other things to be one step ahead. So that was interesting. I think it's also worth flagging. You mentioned all the villains. They're mentioned by name, right? But we don't actually know if they're villains or not. Like
Yeah.
this isn't necessarily a rogues gallery. I see your comments there, H.A. Gross. We'll get to them in a minute. We want to stick to this book for a moment. So yeah, so that'll be interesting to see, like what are his relationships to all these different folks, and what are they up to? Right, we really only just see them as buddies playing poker. Some of them have, Harvey has his Two-Face nickname. Enigma clearly is the interested in puzzles and riddles and mind games and all that kind of thing. So that their personalities are there, but whether they are actually criminals or not, what they do is remains to be seen. So I thought it was really well done, and I would enjoy continuing with this book.
And I think with those characters, like, what if some of them become villains? Still different origins for what we know, but then some of them remain allies. I think would be fascinating. Like if Waylon, like Killer Croc, remains a friend of Bruce Wayne, that would be awesome. I'm sure that. And also, at the end of issue 2, Selena Kyle makes an appearance in a flashback when her and Bruce are kids. So we're going to explore that more going forward too. So there's all these elements. I think you're right too. I also don't really have an answer for why that is. Why the world of Batman is so fascinating on its own that we can have stories from completely different characters and be just as fascinated. I mean, look at like you mentioned, Gotham Central, great book. I mean, the show Gotham, people loved, and then heck, we just talked about and raved about the Penguin, which is like Batman never makes an appearance there, but takes place very much in that world. And I think here, I think a lot of it does have to do with just Scott Snyder's storytelling is just on fire here. It's so well constructed from a narrative standpoint, and the perspectives that it's great world building, but it's also there are just great character moments. And again, Alfred is so fascinating here as a big point of view character. I'm really interested in seeing more of how he got to be this point and what his end game will be in. To be in a world where Bruce and Alfred did not know each other growing up, and now they're brought into each other as rivals, but are likely to become partners, but in a very different way than what we're accustomed to. I think it's just there was clearly a lot of intricate planning here. I don't think Snyder would have done this book if he didn't really want to. And clearly, all the passion that he brought to his New 52 run is there. I cannot wait to see the story continue. So, yeah, I think, none of it feels gimmicky, like, oh, what if we just did this? It's like, it all feels very intentional and well crafted. And, I have it's fun to kind of guess where, like we were talking about earlier, like with the villain names, but where their stories will go. But I think there's clearly a plan here going forward, and I'm really excited to see how the story plays out. So yeah, so far great first two issues, and and whereas I do want to wait for the trade for Absolute Superman to get the full arc here, this one I'm like, give me every issue. I cannot wait. It'll probably be I'm reading the issues digitally right now, and it'll probably be one where I'll get those and then get the trade and have both there because it's that good.
Yeah, yeah. And also, it's a bit more of a mystery story, and so I think you want to keep up so you don't get
Yes,
spoiled on different elements too.
yes, exactly, absolutely. So yeah. What were I don't see the comments on here. I think you can see those, but like, was someone referencing a different book or?
Yeah, some a name I don't recognize. H.A. Gross wanted to know our thoughts on Symphony Comics, and I didn't want to
Comics.
drop in Batman, but they kind of came in. They prompted it a couple times. Uh, I will confess I'm not familiar with Symphony Comics. I'm assuming that's an imprint or a publisher or something. Um,
I actually am not either. I don't know if it's an imprint or if it's like something like that. It's the alternate universe type thing, but I actually don't know.
yeah,
Sorry, you've got us stumped there. So, congrats to you. You've got two comic book geeks here stumped on something. But I would love to learn more about what that is.
sure. Yeah, same.
Yeah. But
All
yeah.
right,
So
shall I move on
let's
to?
yep. Let's do it. So yeah. Absolute
Alrighty.
Batman. Excellent.
Yep. All right, my second book is the new launch of West Coast Avengers. So this is by Jerry Duggan, art by Danny Kim and Arthur Hesley, Joe Caramagna on letters. So this is kind of following up, well, yes, definitely following up on Jerry Duggan's run on Iron Man, 25-ish issues that dovetailed with his work in the Krakoa X-Men era. It was kind of a de facto X book for the last 8 or 10 issues when Tony Stark married Emma Frost for mutually beneficial reasons. So it's following up on that book. It's also, I think, but I'm not totally sure if it's following up on Al Ewing's books. He did an Ant-Man miniseries and a Wasp miniseries, and then those came together in a book called Avengers Inc. that turned out to be a miniseries. I think it was supposed to be an ongoing, but unfortunately was only just a 5-issue series. In which, and especially in the Ant-Man and the Avengers Inc., we kind of got the story of how Hank Pym and Ultron separated again. So there was a standalone graphic novel by Rick Remender called Rage of Ultron. It's probably going back a decade, in which Ultron and Hank Pym kind of fused into one body. And that was their status quo. And it seemed like nobody really knew what to do with that because they just kind of, neither one of them appeared much in books from that point on. And so Al Ewing worked out a way to separate them again. And by the end of Avengers Inc., we have a separate Hank Pym and a separate Ultron, and one of the Ultron iterations who was good or more friendly to the Avengers cause. And so I'm not sure if that is the Ultron. I'm actually not sure if that is Ultron that is appearing in this book or not. I thought it was going to be based on the the promos when we knew that Ultron was on this lineup. But to be honest, after reading the first issue, I'm not totally sure if we're dealing with that Ultron or a different Ultron. But the Tony's idea for this version of the West Coast Avengers is to help rehabilitate villains. So it feels like Jerry Duggan has taken that aspect of the Krakoa era of X-Men, where all the mutants were all part of the Krakoan society, heroes, villains, and otherwise, were all kind of mixed in there. And you had Magneto and Apocalypse and Mr. Sinister and Mystique all serving together in the leadership with Professor X and Storm and Jean Grey and so forth. So it feels a little bit of that flavor. Not that it just a complete ripoff, but you're kind of picking up on that same theme of can we redeem and work together with former antagonists. So you've got Ultron in the lineup. You've got Blue Bolt in the lineup. And then, as you see he's not on the cover. And you got Spider-Woman, who doesn't get a whole lot to do in the first issue, and that's kind of like even she is sort of complaining to Tony. So I think that's a point we're supposed to recognize. She's like, "Why am I here? I'm not really sure what I'm doing here." But there's reference to the fact that she has a supervillain past, or at least a criminal record. And then you've got James Rhodes, War Machine, and Firestar makes a one-page appearance, presumably since she's on the cover of the first issue. She'll be more integral into the book, but not sure what role she'll be playing yet. But so mostly get kind of the bringing the team together. We get some narration from Tony explaining his motivation for putting this team together, and a first kind of mission where they get to be seen helping the public. Mostly goes well, but there are some bumps along the road because they haven't worked together as a team, and you've got people who are former villains who are not used to working on any sort of team. So it's all that usual kind of bring the team together sort of thing. And if that was all the book was, I would say it was good but not great. But the last few pages, and I feel bad spoiling this, but I don't really know how else to talk about why I was excited about this book without getting into it. But the last few pages, we discover that there is another Ultron who is not quite as well-intentioned, who has kind of set up a church and with like a healing ministry. And so we meet this woman who is a terminal cancer patient, and she winds up falling into his circle and seeking him out for the healing that he's offering. And as you might imagine, the healing that he's offering involves becoming more machine than man. And so that really kind of intrigued me, that angle that comes up in the last few pages. Like, okay, where are we going with this? There's kind of a quasi-religious angle to it. In fact, the storyline on the last page is teased as the Gospel of Ultron. And so this kind of like AI as faith healer, I thought was a more interesting take than, for example, what we were seeing with AI and Brainiac in Absolute Superman. Not that it's necessarily fair to pit these things together, but just because we were talking about them both this week, that kind of really grabbed me. So I was interested in this book because I liked what Jerry Duggan did more or less during the Krakoa era. And I was curious to see if it was going to follow up. I really liked the Al Ewing books that I mentioned, and so I was hoping for a continuation of that story. But that hook at the end kind of, now I'm curious about this book on its own merits.
That is a fascinating concept. I mean, when you say Ultron and church healing ministry, that's not two things I would ever expect in the same sentence. So that right there is a hook. But it also echoes. I mean, I really like Jerry Duggan and Brian Posen's Deadpool run back in the day, so where they came up with a lot of concepts like that. So that sounds like something he would go for that's like a little out there, but it's also really compelling. And no, you make a good point about like, it's like, okay, everyone is trying, both like comic book writers, authors, filmmakers are trying to say something about AI. And it is hard to say something original because it's like everywhere right now. So if you can develop a concept that is very unique in that respect, I give you a lot of props. So that is a great hook.
Yeah, yeah,
So
that was
it sounds
like
interesting. I mean, I like this team up a lot. Those are so like it's a good mix of like characters that people know and love, and some of the like lesser B characters like that. And so it's a cool team up. But I just like that idea of like what it'll do with Ultron. That sounds fascinating.
yeah. I think the book could have done maybe with a little bit more of the what's the team like together, what are the dynamics.
Sure.
Rhodey doesn't get a whole lot to do. Firestar, like I said, was on one page, but there's only so many pages in a comic, and I'm sure that uh, that will all go somewhere. Jerry Duggan has written good team books before, and uh, I think has a good voice for different characters. But yeah, it could have been a little bit stronger in terms of what's the team dynamic going to be like. But I'll give it a lot of rope for the high concept.
Definitely. And like, did Alex Ross do that cover, or was that it? Just looks like his style.
I don't think so, but yes, it is kind of in that style, and that
Yeah.
is not exactly the same, but the interiors. I'm guessing it's all Arthur Hesley colors on the cover and the interiors. Has that same kind of not as vibrant color, more that kind of washed out.
Yeah.
I think they're going for I don't live on the West Coast. I've only spent a little bit of time there, but maybe just trying to get like a different sort of hazy sunlight kind of vibe to the visuals.
Yeah, definitely. I hope the artist heard that because, thinking that they were Alex Ross, I hope they are feeling on cloud nine right now because it really does. Especially looking at Iron Man right there. It's just that very realistic, very detailed sculpture like aesthetic.
Yeah, and that carries over into the interiors. That it also, I mean, I think the cover, just because there's more time to do these sorts of things, maybe has the best example of it. But the interiors, I think, still does a good job with the reflectivity of both Iron Man and Ultron and War Machine. Like you really get a sense that these are characters wearing burnished metal and not just
Yeah.
rigid spandex.
Right. Right. No, it's really impressive. So very cool. Well, excellent recommendation. I think there's it sounds like one well worth checking out, and especially with that hook at the end.
Yeah.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, Andy, that wraps up. Any others you want to give a quick shout out to?
Um, I think that covers all the books that are on my mind at the moment. I'm sure there are other things I read, but nothing's kind of jumping out at me right at this minute.
Yeah. Is there one out of those you really want to recommend to viewers, listeners today?
Um, I think, like I said, the West Coast Avengers, especially with that theme of kind of the crossing over of science and possibly a religious angle and so forth, I think
Yeah.
it fits well with the theme of the podcast. And so, yeah, I would recommend that to folks to check out.
Very cool. And with no surprise, mine is Absolute Batman. But as a longtime Batman acolyte, it is very impressive if you can get someone like me to find something interesting about a new take on the character. And this does it with flying colors. So definitely pick it up if you have not done so already.
Yeah, and if that's more what you're looking for, if that's your jam, I would not begrudge anyone for going for Absolute Batman over West Coast Avengers if
Hey, pick
that's
them
more what
up.
you're looking for.
Pick both up. You got some great storytellers on both books.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, Andy, this was a blast as always. And to our viewers, listeners out there, we thank you so much for joining us and check us out. And if you would be so kind, leave us a 5-star review. Head to our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. We're all over. And you can also, if you're a Patreon, if you are one of our Patreons, we want to give you a huge shout out. Thank you so much for what you do there. We really appreciate it. And we will see you next time. And remember, we are all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.